of presentations this morning. We're going to start off with Gwen and Velly, and then Daniela, and then Paul Ferraro right before the coffee break. But let me turn things over to Gwen.
Okay, so first of all, thank you to all the team from Invaluable to giving us the opportunity to me and I include all the people from my project PES Mix to present here in Barcelona. So just to give you a little bit of context about the presentation, it comes from different discussions we had within the PES Mix project. This PES Mix is coordinated by Alain Carsanti, that some of you knows pretty well, and Céline Ditty that is over there. It also involved Driss and Sébastien that is going to present a poster this afternoon. So, well, one of the objectives of this PES Mix project was to evaluate, basically all of you, to evaluate the impact of the PES instruments. And well, what happened is, when we started 2 or 3 years ago designing our impact analysis, we kind of reviewed all the literature and look at the methods and the sampling strategy and etc. And what we realized is actually that there was a kind of a bunch of methodological choice to make when you're designing this impact analysis that are really different from what you can see in other fields, like traditional fields of impact evaluations that are more microfinance and health and education. So the idea of the presentation was not really to present some empirical results, it was more like to share the discussion we had with Driss and Céline since 2 or 3 years and share it with you, because I guess these are choices you had to make during your own research. So the idea was present all those choices and look at the implication for identification strategy. So first we look at the evaluation design, unit of analysis, and etc., and then we get closer to the estimation. Okay, so first question you have to ask when you're trying to design an impact analysis is that which scale I'm willing to work. So you kind of have 2 trends in the literature: either you're working at national level or either you're working at regional level. So basically, the point is working in national level is that you have a larger internal validity, and it's basically what the decision maker wants, is to get a kind of result, what was the impact of my program. But on the other hand, when you're working at regional level, you get more chance to comply with your hypotheses that are that no unconfounding factor like influencing, etc., as treatment and the outcome. And since for PES, lots of impact are really, lots of these confounding factors are really geographic factors and agroecological characteristics and everything. So when you're working at regional level, you get maybe some kind of trade-off. And although you understand better the allocation criteria, and it's easier to conduct remote sensing analysis, because obviously you just need like basically, let's say 2, 3, 4 images to analyze this. When you get some kind of regional and national analysis, you will need maybe 1,000 of images. That is probably not affordable. And then we come to what we discussed yesterday with Rodrigo Arriagada, is should we work at pixel level or at landowner level? And obviously the main advantage is that you get huge sample of lots in the observation when you work at pixel level, so it's kind of good for your statistics. And it's good also because PES impact will depend a lot of, as I said, geographic factors, so it makes sense to have information at pixel level. But it's kind of difficult to estimate because it raises a lot of questions about the estimation and correlated, spatial correlation. And also maybe if we socialize the pixel, as we said yesterday, I don't know if we're not overweighted at some point the decision of large landowners to deforest or keep foresting or deforest. So that's, I mean, we're not trying to give answer during this presentation, we're more like raising questions. And on the other hand, when you're working at landowner, the nice thing is that you're actually closer from your decision maker, so you're actually closer from your unit of analysis as an economist. So it's kind of feeling comfortable. But although you might have data requirement about land tenure that might not be available because sometimes it's all messy and you don't really know who's the landowner. And although when this is for PES, I guess for natural protected area, the thing about the decision maker is a bit different because you have to identify who is the decision maker actually, and it's more difficult. And also what has already been emphasized in your work is that you've got a mix of forest that is under protection and a mix of forest that is not in protection. So what Honey-Rosés and Baylis came with is some kind of polygon space, which is an overlapping of land tenure, land use, and PES. So you get some kind of homogeneous polygons of land use that belong to the same people and with or without protections. So it's kind of bring us closer from the decision maker, but also allow us to include some information about the land use and well, the geographic characteristics of the unit of analysis. Then, when we get to who is in our sample, and in our case, when we were studying PSAH, the Mexican program of PES that Sebastian talked about yesterday, basically, well, the program started in 2003. We're coming in 2013, and people enroll for 5 years, and they can decide to renew or not. So when we were starting sampling, we had people that were there during all the program, people that actually were there at the beginning but left, and people who weren't there at the beginning that were just enrolled for like 2 or 3 years and they were not there in 2003. So then who is you treated unit? Who is you treated and what is your treatment? And it's also worrying because, well, we consider variability of data, so basically we don't have images for each year, we just have images at the beginning and at the end, and sometimes way in the past. But, I mean, you have, it leads us to some kind of identification problem, which are mainly due to anticipation effect and lag impact. So anticipation effects, I would call all, it can be positive because landowners might be willing to send some signals, so they might reduce deforestation right before entering the program in order to send signals to the authorities. On the other hand, you can say, well, maybe they actually will rise the deforestation because they won't be able to cut anymore in about 2 or 3 years because they're entering the program. Or you can have also lagged impact because at the end of the program, people will say, let's get back to deforestation, or if the program managed to have permanent impact, then it still have a positive impact on deforestation. So eventually, well, it leads us to also kind of a problem for our identification strategy, Aschenfeld's deep, etc. And also it's very difficult to characterize what is our average impact because it's actually a mix of maybe increase in the beginning, then get stable and increase again. So your mean impact doesn't really give you the whole story because the whole story is really time specific. So should we use some sample? That's a question we're asking. We have the same problem over space, which is due to leakage effect. All of you are really familiar with leakage effect, so I will be really quick on this. So it leads to kind of some problem for estimation, the Sudva hypothesis, and also might bias our estimate of additionality. So should we try systematically to model spatial interaction? And then we get to the estimation. So, in the past, the literature basically made some kind of comparison between state-funded PES and conditional cash transfer. So basically, you've got a cash transfer that is a payment and a conditionality that is a restriction on land use, at least for land use restricting PES as a PSH. So most of the study uses a dummy variable to control for, well, to define the treatment. But if we use dummy variable, we actually don't capture the heterogeneity of treatment. And when we get further to define a continuous treatment, we have a problem because we basically don't know how to define this treatment, this continuous treatment. And the fact is, when we get to wonder how to define this continuous treatment, we have to wonder if we focus on on conditionality and or on the payment. That are basically two parts of the scheme that shouldn't be disentangled because, well, it's part of the same problem. But when we're defining the variable, we have to focus either on payment or conditionality. For example, this is the Mexican PSAH, and when you see the total amount received at the right, it's partly disconnected from the number of hectares that is enrolled, because it's basically a mix between the early payments and the number of years you spend in the program. So let's say for an amount X, you can have the same amount for somebody who just entered but has huge payments because he's been enrolling a lot of money, and for somebody who's been enrolled for like 10 years but has small payments. So then it's just a completely different story. So it reminds us about, well, how should I define my variable? And then when you decide to focus on the number of vectors that is enrolled, you implicitly focus on conditionality, while when you're using the payment, you focus on the payment. So those are the same schemes, but there are different definitions of the variable. So it kind of, we might wonder about which is the one most relevant. And then we get to the classic issue of selection bias in our estimation. So I'll be quick on this one. It's just common what we said since yesterday is basically there is a bias. We don't know in which direction it will go, because we can say there is adverse selection. On the other hand, we can say that the bias will target specific areas, so we cannot compare the targeted landowners with the other one. So we don't know which direction it goes, but we know they're different. So it's a classic problem of impact evaluation, and it should lead us to wonder about how to choose a control group and account for heterogeneity, knowing that most of the estimators actually rely on this conditional heterogeneity assumption. That is, well, as I explained earlier. So if you use a dummy variable, what the question you should be asking is, what are the observable and unobservable that are influencing both the PES reception and our outcome? Deforestation, for instance. And when you use a continuous variable, then can it be considered as exogenous? And we developed the payment of Mexican PSAH, and we realized that basically the question is not anymore who is entering and who is not entering, but it becomes who is entering first, or how many of their forests will they put under conservation, and that might create endogeneity bias. So the way you define your variable will lead us to a lot of new identification strategy. If we want to consider treatment heterogeneity, we have to review the way we want to estimate the impact. So, if we use a continuous variable, can it be considered as exogenous? Maybe we should try now running a placebo test, running robustness test to test if we can actually consider that this variable is exogenous or not. And if we cannot reject the endogeneity of the treatment variation, should we turn to instrumental variable in order to estimate the impact? And obviously, as I said, we're just raising questions, so there's no clear answer to that. It's just, it depends basically on multiple factors, available data, on a large enough control group, agroecological heterogeneity, and one of the great, to our point of view, one of the greatest things to understand is the allocation process. How do landowners, and why do landowners receive the program first, and etc. And other policy implemented, such as natural protected area, for instance. And you find a trade-off. That's what has been quickly discussed yesterday by Paul Ferraro. It's just, you have some kind of trade-off between the possibility to get less biased estimates, which is basically using instrumental variable, and internal validity of the impact identified. So what you identify with instrumental variable as, well, it's supposed not to be biased if you comply with all your hypotheses, but it has a lesser validity. It's just valid for the observation that are predicted by your instrument, more or less. It's the other way around. So there was a whole controversy between Deaton and Imbitz about should we try to use IV, and is it good to use IV knowing that we actually just identify a late? Imbitz has really, this nice paper is called Better Late Than Nothing. So, and now, well, we get to other issue, and maybe something we haven't looked at in the literature so far is changing our outcome variable actually, and maybe trying to look at other things than deforestation and additionality, because obviously the use of the payments will matter for permanence, and how it has influenced, how it has impacted, especially economic activities, will change the way the permanence of the PES. So the future impact of the program once people stop receiving payments. So one of the questions we're trying to ask is, shouldn't we look at the forest, shouldn't we look more on economic activity and stuff like that? And then where that's something I guess that some other person in the room will develop more in the forthcoming hours. So I'll be very quick, but PS can obviously have heterogeneous impact, and you can find that some impact are only on subgroups and there are no on the other groups. So the mean impact actually doesn't really make sense, the average impact doesn't really make sense. There are techniques that can be used to assess heterogeneity. Shouldn't we use this technique? So, and just to conclude, so as I said, these are all a bunch of questions that came when we were designing our impact evaluation, and I guess you basically had the same problems when you were designing your own impact evaluation, and we realized there was no systematic review of all these questions and all the implications. So we're just like giving some thoughts about what happened during our discussion, and well, I guess you can also participate to this discussion, and we can exchange about how we see the different choices, the different methodological choices. And just to end, there is a recent working paper that has been produced by Len Pritchett in Centre for Global Development, and that basically just aims at reminding us that empirical evaluation, even if they are, even FCT are empirical facts, I mean, they have a context, a specified context, they are specific in time and space, and we should be really careful in interpreting and extrapolating these results. That's it.